In the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood of Maplewood, life unfolded in its usual rhythm every Tuesday morning. The sun peeked over the rooftops, casting golden rays on freshly mowed lawns and flower beds bursting with color. Birds chirped cheerfully from their perches, and the faint hum of distant traffic blended seamlessly with the calm atmosphere. It was a place where everyone knew each other, at least by sight, and where routines ruled the day. Joe Martinez had been driving his garbage truck through these streets for nearly 10 years. To the residents of Maplewood, Joe wasn't just another faceless worker. He was part of the fabric of the community. He always greeted people with a warm smile and remembered little details about their lives. Mrs. Thompson on Oak Lane liked to bake cookies for her grandchildren every weekend. Mr. Patel down the block often complained about how much dog hair his golden retriever shed. And then there was young Ethan, who lived near the cul-de-sac at the end of Elm Street. Joe had seen him playing outside many times before, riding his bike or chasing after stray soccer balls that rolled into the gutter. This particular Tuesday, however, something felt different as Joe navigated his truck toward the cul-de-sac. Maybe it was the stillness in the air, or perhaps it was the absence of the usual sounds. The clatter of trash cans being wheeled out to the curb, the chatter of neighbors exchanging pleasantries. Whatever it was, Joe couldn't shake the feeling that today would be unlike any other. As Joe turned onto Elm Street, the first thing he noticed was the empty driveway of Ethan's house. Normally, Ethan's father would already have the family's trash bins lined up neatly by the curb, but not today. Instead, Joe spotted a small figure standing barefoot in the middle of the road. At first glance, it looked like Ethan, but something was wrong. Very wrong. The boy wasn't running around or laughing like he usually did. His shoulders were slumped, and his head hung low. As Joe brought the truck to a stop, he realized the child was crying, hard. Tears streamed down his face, leaving streaks on his cheeks. Joe frowned, concern etched across his features. This wasn't normal behavior for a kid like Ethan, who was usually so full of energy and joy. Joe stepped out of the truck, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't want to startle the boy, but he also knew he couldn't ignore what was happening. Walking slowly toward Ethan, Joe called out gently, "Hey there, buddy, are you okay?" At the sound of Joe's voice, Ethan's head snapped up. His wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto Joe's face, and for a moment he seemed frozen in place. Then, without warning, the boy bolted forward, sprinting straight toward Joe as fast as his little legs could carry him. Before Joe could react, Ethan crashed into him, wrapping his arms tightly around Joe's waist. Startled but compassionate, Joe knelt down to Ethan's level, placing a reassuring hand on the boy's trembling shoulder. Whoa, slow down," Joe said softly. "What's going on, champ? Why are you crying?" Ethan hiccuped, trying to catch his breath between sobs. For several seconds, all he could do was cling to Joe, shaking uncontrollably. Finally, when he managed to speak, his words came out in a jumbled rush. "They're fighting. Mommy and Daddy, they're yelling really loud. And there's guns." Joe's heart sank. Guns? That changed everything. He glanced toward Ethan's house, half expecting to see someone storming out the front door, but the house appeared eerily quiet from the outside, its windows dark and uninviting. Still, Joe couldn't dismiss the fear in Ethan's voice. If the boy said there were guns involved, Joe had no choice but to take it seriously. "Okay, buddy," Joe said calmly, keeping his tone steady despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. "Let's call someone who can help, all right? Do you trust me?" Ethan nodded vigorously, his grip tightening around Joe's arm. With one hand still resting protectively on the boy's back, Joe reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Dialing 911, he explained the situation quickly but clearly to the operator, making sure to emphasize the mention of firearms. Within moments, he heard the distant wail of sirens growing louder as emergency vehicles sped toward the scene. While they waited, Joe did his best to comfort Ethan. He asked simple questions to distract the boy: what his favorite cartoon was, whether he liked pizza or burgers more, but Ethan's answers were short and distracted. His gaze kept darting nervously toward his house as if expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. By now, curious neighbors had begun to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some stood on their porches, whispering among themselves. Others peered through their curtains, trying to piece together what was unfolding. A few even approached Joe cautiously, asking if everything was okay. But Joe simply shook his head, signaling that they should stay back. The arrival of the police transformed the peaceful cul-de-sac into a hive of activity. Officers poured out of their cars, setting up barriers and instructing everyone to remain indoors. The once tranquil street buzzed with tension as officers donned bulletproof vests and prepared for the worst. All the while, Ethan remained glued to Joe's side, refusing to let go. For Joe, this was far removed from his typical Tuesday morning collecting garbage. Yet here he was, smack in the middle of a crisis, holding the hand of a terrified child who had placed his trust in a complete stranger. Little did Joe know, this was only the beginning of an extraordinary chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the entire neighborhood and on his own life. As the police cars arrived, their flashing lights painted the quiet cul-de-sac in shades of red and blue. The peaceful morning was shattered, replaced by an urgent hum of activity. Officers moved quickly, setting up barriers across the street to keep onlookers at bay. Neighbors who had ventured outside were ushered back into their homes, their faces pale with worry. Some hesitated, glancing nervously toward Ethan's house, but the stern voices of the officers left no room for argument. "Stay inside and lock your doors," they instructed firmly. "This is for your safety." Ethan clung tightly to Joe, his small hands gripping the fabric of Joe's uniform shirt as if it were a lifeline. Despite the chaos around them, Joe remained calm, speaking softly to the boy. "You're safe now, buddy," he reassured him. "The police are here to help." But Ethan's wide eyes betrayed his fear. He kept looking over his shoulder at the house, his body trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. Paramedics soon joined the scene, wheeling out a stretcher and medical kits. One of them approached Joe and Ethan, crouching down to Ethan's level. She introduced herself as Sarah and asked gently, "Hi there, sweetheart. My name is Sarah. Can you tell me what happened?" Her voice was soothing, but Ethan shook his head violently, burying his face into Joe's chest. Joe gave her an apologetic look. "He's scared," Joe explained. "He said his parents were fighting and there were guns involved. That's all I know." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. She didn't press Ethan further, instead focusing on checking his physical condition. She examined his bare feet, which were dirty and slightly scratched from running barefoot on the pavement. "We need to clean these cuts," she said kindly, though Ethan flinched when she tried to touch him. Joe stepped in again, offering reassurance. "It's okay, champ. She just wants to make sure you're not hurt." After some coaxing, Ethan allowed Sarah to tend to his feet, though he never let go of Joe's hand. Meanwhile, the situation escalated rapidly. SWAT teams began arriving, their armored vehicles rolling onto the street with a low rumble. Officers armed with rifles took positions behind their cars, while others carried shields and helmets, preparing for the worst. A negotiator set up a speaker system near Ethan's house, attempting to establish contact with whoever was inside. "This is the police," the negotiator called out, his voice amplified through the megaphone. "We need to speak with you. Please come to the door." But the house remained ominously silent. No one answered. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of curtains moving slightly in the breeze and the distant chirping of birds, oblivious to the tension below. Neighbors peeked out from behind their windows, whispering among themselves. "What's going on?" one woman whispered to her husband. "Do you think someone's really in there with a gun?" The uncertainty gnawed at everyone. Even Joe, who had seen his fair share of strange situations during his years as a garbage man, couldn't shake the unease settling in his stomach. He glanced down at Ethan, whose tears had slowed, but whose grip on Joe's hand remained ironclad. Joe felt a surge of protectiveness for the boy. Whatever was happening inside that house, Ethan had already been through enough. Social workers arrived next, ready to assist once the immediate danger passed. One of them, a kind woman named Linda, approached Joe and Ethan cautiously. "Hi. Ethan, she said softly, kneeling beside him. My name is Linda. I'm here to help you, okay? Can you tell me what happened this morning? Ethan hesitated, glancing up at Joe as if seeking permission to speak. Joe gave him an encouraging nod. It's all right, buddy, he said. You can trust her. Taking a deep breath, Ethan began to recount the events leading up to his escape. His words came out haltingly at first, interrupted by sniffles and hiccups. But as he spoke, the story unfolded in heartbreaking detail. Mommy and Daddy were yelling again, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They've done it before, but today it was worse. Daddy was drinking, and he got really mad. He started throwing things, plates and glasses, and then he went upstairs. When he came back down, he had a gun. Linda listened intently, jotting notes on her clipboard. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes betrayed her concern. And then what happened, Ethan? She prompted gently. He pointed it at Mommy, Ethan continued, his voice cracking. She screamed and ran into the kitchen. I heard them shouting, and then I saw Daddy hit her. I got so scared. I ran out the door. I didn't know where else to go, so I went to the garbage truck. I thought maybe Joe could help me. Joe's heart ached hearing the boy's words. It was clear that Ethan had acted purely on instinct, seeking refuge with the first person he trusted. Joe tightened his grip on Ethan's hand, silently vowing to do whatever it took to keep the boy safe. While Ethan spoke, the standoff outside his house grew more intense. Negotiators continued trying to communicate with the occupants, but their efforts yielded no response. Officers used drones equipped with cameras to peer through the windows, hoping to assess the situation without putting anyone in harm's way. What they saw confirmed Ethan's account. 2 adults were indeed inside, and one appeared to be holding a firearm. The tension on the street thickened, palpable even to those watching from afar. Reporters began arriving, drawn by the commotion. They parked their vans along the perimeter of the barricade, setting up tripods and microphones. Camera crews captured footage of the scene, while reporters delivered live updates to news stations. Authorities have cordoned off this suburban neighborhood following reports of a domestic dispute involving weapons, one reporter announced into her microphone. Residents have been evacuated as police work to resolve the situation peacefully. Despite the growing media presence, Joe stayed focused on Ethan. He shielded the boy from the prying lenses of the cameras, ensuring that Ethan's frightened face wouldn't end up on the evening news. Don't look at them, buddy, Joe murmured. Just focus on me, all right? You're doing great. Ethan nodded weakly, leaning into Joe's side. For a moment, the world seemed to fade away. The blaring sirens, the shouted commands, the clicking of camera shutters, all drowned out by the comforting rhythm of Joe's steady breathing. In that fleeting instant, Ethan found solace in the unwavering support of a stranger who had become his protector. As the standoff dragged on, the weight of the situation pressed down on everyone. Officers exchanged tense glances, their radios crackling with updates. Social workers conferred quietly, discussing contingency plans for Ethan's care. And Joe, still kneeling beside the boy, held fast to the belief that somehow everything would turn out okay. Little did he know, the most harrowing moments were yet to come. The hours ticked by, each minute stretching longer than the last. The once peaceful cul-de-sac on Elm Street had transformed into a scene straight out of a movie. Flashing lights, armed officers, and an air thick with tension. Neighbors huddled, indoors, their faces pressed against windows as they tried to piece together what was happening. Some whispered prayers, while others clutched their phones, refreshing social media feeds for updates. The quiet rhythm of Maplewood mornings felt like a distant memory. For Joe and Ethan, time seemed to blur. They sat together near the back of a police cruiser, wrapped in a heavy emergency blanket despite the mild weather. Ethan's trembling had lessened, but his grip on Joe's hand remained firm. Every so often he would glance toward his house, his eyes wide with fear. Joe did his best to distract him, pointing out small things around them. the way the wind rustled through the trees or how the sunlight caught the edges of the police barricades. But even Joe couldn't ignore the growing unease in the air. Negotiators continued their attempts to reach Ethan's parents, their voices calm but firm over the megaphone. "We're here to help," they repeated. "Please come to the door. Let us resolve this peacefully." Yet no response came from inside the house. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional crackle of police radios and the distant hum of generators powering the equipment. Drone footage revealed glimpses of movement within the home. Officers watched intently as shadows shifted, behind drawn curtains. At one point they spotted Ethan's father pacing back and forth in the living room, clutching something metallic, a handgun. His mother was seated on the couch, her face buried in her hands. She appeared unharmed but visibly shaken. The images painted a grim picture. Two adults trapped in a volatile situation, unable to find a way out. As the standoff dragged on, the media presence swelled. News vans lined the outer perimeter, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Reporters stood in clusters, microphones in hand, delivering updates to eager audiences glued to their screens. Authorities remained tight-lipped about the details of the ongoing incident, one reporter said, her tone serious. However, sources confirmed that a child has been removed from the home safely, and negotiations are underway. Joe noticed the cameras turning toward him and Ethan. He instinctively pulled the boy closer, shielding him from view. "Don't look at them, buddy," he murmured. "Just focus on me." Ethan nodded, burying his face into Joe's side. For all the chaos surrounding them, Joe's presence provided a rare sense of stability. To Ethan, Joe wasn't just a garbage man anymore. He was a protector, someone who had stepped up when the world felt like it was falling apart. Back at the command post, officers debated their next move. The negotiators' patience was wearing thin. Hours had passed without progress, and the risk of escalation loomed large. "We can't wait much longer," one officer said. "If we don't act soon, this could turn deadly." A decision was made to deploy tear gas as a last resort. It was a risky move, but authorities hoped it would force Ethan's parents out of the house without further violence. SWAT teams prepared for the operation, donning gas masks and arming themselves with non-lethal weapons. The neighborhood braced itself for what was to come. Inside homes along Elm Street, residents crouched low, following instructions to stay away from windows and doors. Parents hugged their children tightly, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. Dogs whimpered in confusion, sensing the heightened anxiety in the air. Even the birds seemed to fall silent, as if nature itself understood the gravity of the moment. Then, it happened. A loud hiss echoed through the street as canisters of tear gas were launched into the house. Thick plumes of smoke billowed out of the windows, curling into the sky like ghostly tendrils. Moments later, muffled shouts erupted from within. Ethan flinched at the sound, gripping Joe's shirt even tighter. "It's okay," Joe whispered, though his own heart raced. "They're trying to make sure everyone stays safe." The shouting grew louder, punctuated by the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. Then came a sharp bang, a gunshot. Everyone froze, their breaths caught in their throats. Officers sprang into action, storming the house with shields raised. The SWAT team moved swiftly, clearing rooms one by one. Inside, they found Ethan's mother collapsed on the floor, unconscious but alive, overcome by the effects of the tear gas. Nearby, his father lay bleeding from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the leg. He was disoriented and struggling to breathe, but alive. Medics rushed in, stabilizing both adults before loading them onto stretchers. As they were wheeled out of the house, neighbors watched silently, their expressions a mix of relief and horror. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the emotional scars would linger for years to come. Ethan stared at the stretcher carrying his father, tears streaming down his face again. Joe wrapped an arm around the boy's shoulders, pulling him close. "He's going to get help now," Joe said softly. "And so is your mom. You did the right thing by running to me, Ethan. You saved yourself." Social workers approached cautiously, ready to take Ethan into protective custody. Linda, the kind woman who had spoken to him earlier, knelt beside him. "Ethan," she said gently, "we're going to take care of you now. You'll be safe, I promise." Ethan hesitated, glancing up at Joe. Will I see Joe again?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Linda smiled reassuringly. "Of course," she said. "Joe's been amazing today. We'll make sure you stay in touch." Joe gave Ethan a final, heartfelt hug before handing him over to Linda. As the boy was led away, Joe felt a pang of sadness, but also pride. In the span of a single morning, he had gone from being just another familiar face in the neighborhood to someone who had made a real difference in a child's life. The street began to clear as authorities packed up their equipment. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, marking the area as a crime scene. Neighbors emerged cautiously from their homes, exchanging hugs and words of comfort. Many thanked Joe for his quick thinking and bravery, calling him a hero. But Joe shook, his head modestly. "I just did what anyone would have done," he replied. "That little boy needed help and I was there." As night fell, the cul-de-sac returned to an uneasy quiet. The flashing lights disappeared, replaced by the soft glow of porch lamps. Life on Elm Street would never be quite the same after what had transpired, but the community had banded together in the face of adversity. And for Joe Martinez, the events of that day served as a powerful reminder of the impact one person could have, even in the most unexpected moments. As the dust began to settle on Elm Street, the focus shifted from the dramatic events of the standoff to understanding the deeper story behind it all. Ethan, now safely in the care of social workers, was taken to a nearby community center where he could rest and begin processing the trauma he had endured. Linda, the compassionate social worker who had been by his side throughout the ordeal, stayed close, ensuring that the boy felt secure and supported. Joe, too, remained nearby, unwilling to leave until he knew Ethan was truly okay. Though he wasn't officially part of the investigation or Ethan's care team, his presence seemed to provide a sense of stability for the frightened child. "You've done so much already," Linda told Joe at one point, her tone filled with gratitude. "But if you're willing, we'd love for you to stick around while we talk to him. He trusts you, and that trust is invaluable right now." Joe nodded without hesitation. "Of course," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Inside the community center, a cozy room with soft lighting and comfortable chairs, Ethan sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot chocolate provided by a volunteer. His eyes were red and puffy from crying, but there was a glimmer of calm returning to his face. Linda sat across from him, speaking in a gentle voice as she coaxed more details about his life at home. "Ethan," she began, "can you tell me what usually happens when your mom and dad argue? Is this something that happens often?" Ethan hesitated, clutching the mug tightly in his small hands. For a moment, it looked like he might retreat into silence again. But then, glancing at Joe, who gave him an encouraging nod, he took a shaky breath and started to speak. "They fight sometimes," he admitted quietly. "Mostly about money. Daddy gets really mad when the bills come and Mommy tries to tell him everything will be okay. But he doesn't listen. He yells a lot and sometimes he throws things. Once he broke a lamp." Ethan paused, his lower lip quivering. "Mommy always tells me to go to my room when they fight, but I can still hear them through the walls." Linda listened intently, jotting down notes as Ethan spoke. Her expression remained kind and non-judgmental, even as the weight of the boy's words sank in. "And today?" she asked softly. "What made today different?" Ethan's shoulders slumped and fresh tears welled up in his eyes. "Today was worse," he whispered. "Daddy came home late last night and I think he was drinking. This morning he started yelling before breakfast. He said Mommy had spent too much money on groceries. Then he went upstairs and when he came back down he had the gun. I've never seen him with a gun before. He pointed it at Mommy and she screamed. I got scared and ran out the door." The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Even Joe, who had heard snippets of Ethan's story earlier, felt a lump rise in his throat. It was heartbreaking to imagine such a young child witnessing such violence and fear in his own home. Linda leaned forward slightly, her voice warm and steady. You did the right thing by running, Ethan. You kept yourself safe, and that's what matters most. Do you understand that? Ethan nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in his eyes. But why does Daddy get so angry? He asked, his voice trembling. Does he hate us? Linda's heart ached hearing the question. How do you explain adult problems to a child who only wants to feel loved and protected? She chose her words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have trouble dealing with their feelings, she explained. Your daddy isn't angry because he hates you or your mommy. He's struggling with things inside himself and he doesn't know how to fix them. That's why we're going to make sure both your parents get help so they can learn better ways to handle their emotions. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared down at his mug, tracing the rim with his finger. After a few moments, he looked up at Joe and asked, Will I ever see them again? It was a question no one could answer definitively yet, but Linda responded with honesty and care. Right now, your mom and dad need time to heal, she said. They're both going to doctors and counselors who will help them figure out how to move forward. When they're ready, we'll talk about what's best for you and your family. Until then, you'll stay with people who love and care for you, okay? Though Ethan didn't seem entirely satisfied with the answer, he nodded silently. The exhaustion of the day was beginning to take its toll. His eyelids drooped, and his movements grew slower. A volunteer brought over a pillow and blanket, allowing him to lie down on a nearby couch. Within minutes, he drifted off to sleep, his breathing soft and steady. While Ethan rested, Linda pulled Joe aside for a private conversation. I can't thank you enough for what you've done today, she said earnestly. Ethan trusted you in a way that's rare for someone his age, especially after experiencing something so traumatic. Your calmness and compassion made all the difference. Joe shrugged modestly, though a hint of pride flickered in his eyes. I just did what anyone would have done, he replied. That kid needed help, and I happened to be there. Honestly, I'm just glad he's safe. Linda smiled, but her expression turned serious as she continued. We're going to place Ethan in temporary foster care tonight. It's a wonderful family. They specialize in caring for children who've experienced trauma. But I wanted to ask, would you be open to staying involved in his life? Even if it's just checking in once in a while, it could mean the world to him. Joe didn't hesitate. Absolutely, he said firmly. That boy has been through enough. If being there for him helps even a little, count me in. With that settled, Linda excused herself to update her colleagues and coordinate Ethan's placement in foster care. Meanwhile, Joe returned to the couch where Ethan lay sleeping. Sitting quietly beside him, Joe watched the rise and fall of the boy's chest, marveling at the resilience hidden beneath such a fragile exterior. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with quiet activity. Officers packed up their equipment and yellow tape was removed from the perimeter. Neighbors exchanged hugs and shared stories of relief, though the gravity of the day's events hung heavy in the air. Some approached Joe, thanking him for his role in keeping Ethan safe. Others simply offered knowing nods, acknowledging the profound impact his actions had made. One neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, stopped by with a plate of cookies. For you, she said, pressing the plate into Joe's hands. You're a hero, Joe. We're lucky to have someone like you in our community. Joe chuckled softly, accepting the gesture with gratitude. Thanks, Mrs. Henderson, he said, but I'm just doing my job, and maybe a bit extra today. As evening descended, the cul-de-sac grew quieter. The flashing lights of police cars and ambulances were replaced by the soft glow of street lamps. Life on Elm Street was far from normal, but the first steps toward healing had begun. Inside the community center, a bond forged in the crucible of crisis promised to endure. And for Joe Martinez, the day served as a powerful reminder of the unexpected ways one person's kindness could change a life forever. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, for Ethan, for his parents, and for the entire neighborhood, the seeds of hope had been planted. Sometimes it takes darkness to reveal the light. And on this unforgettable Tuesday, The light shone brightest in the form of a garbage man who became a guardian angel. The hours that followed the dramatic events on Elm Street were a blur of activity for everyone involved. While Ethan rested in the care of social workers and foster parents, authorities worked tirelessly to piece together the full story behind the incident. Investigators combed through the family's home, collecting evidence and documenting the aftermath of the violent confrontation. Neighbors continued to grapple with the shock of what had unfolded, sharing their thoughts in hushed whispers as they tried to make sense of it all. Inside the house, forensic teams photographed broken furniture, shattered glass, and overturned chairs, silent witnesses to the chaos that had erupted earlier that day. Empty liquor bottles littered the kitchen counter, offering a glimpse into the father's struggles with alcohol. In the living room, investigators found letters strewn across the floor, some torn in half, others crumpled into balls. Closer inspection revealed heated exchanges between Ethan's parents about unpaid bills, mounting debt, and frustrations over financial strain. These fragments painted a picture of a marriage under immense pressure, teetering on the edge of collapse. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Ethan's parents received medical attention while being held under police supervision. His mother, though physically unharmed, was treated for smoke inhalation caused by the tear gas. Doctors noted her frazzled demeanor and signs of chronic stress, dark circles under her eyes, trembling hands, and a nervous tic she couldn't seem to control. She cooperated fully with officers, answering questions through tears and expressing deep regret for allowing the situation to spiral so far out of control. Ethan's father, on the other hand, presented a more complicated case. The gunshot wound to his leg required immediate surgery, and once stabilized, he was transferred to a secure wing of the hospital where law enforcement kept close watch. When questioned, he alternated between defensive anger and remorseful sobs. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he insisted repeatedly. I lost it. Everything got too much." Detectives pieced together his version of events. Years, a financial hardship, coupled with untreated mental health issues, had created a perfect storm of despair. He admitted to drinking heavily in recent months, using alcohol as a way to numb the overwhelming anxiety he felt about providing for his family. But instead of easing his burdens, the drinking only made things worse, amplifying his temper and clouding his judgment. The gun, he claimed, was purchased weeks ago after hearing reports of break-ins in neighboring areas. "I thought it would protect us," he said bitterly. "Instead, it almost destroyed everything." As the investigation unfolded, news outlets picked up the story, turning it into a local sensation. Reporters camped outside the hospital and the community center, desperate for updates. Headlines blared phrases like, "Domestic standoff ends," "In hospitalization," and "Garbage man saves boy during family crisis." Joe Martinez found himself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as an unlikely hero who had stepped up when it mattered most. Interviews poured in from radio stations, newspapers, and even national TV networks, but Joe politely declined them all. "It's not about me," he told one persistent journalist. "It's about that little boy and making sure he gets the help he needs." Back at the community center, Ethan woke up groggy and disoriented. For a moment, he forgot where he was, his young mind struggling to reconcile the safety of the cozy room with the terror of the morning. Then he saw Joe sitting nearby, reading a magazine, and relief washed over him. "Joe!" he exclaimed, sitting upright on the couch. Joe set the magazine aside and smiled warmly. "Hey there, champ," he said, moving closer. "How are you feeling?" "I'm okay," Ethan replied, though his voice wavered slightly. "But where am I going now?" Linda, who had been waiting patiently in the corner, stepped forward. "Remember what we talked about earlier?" she asked gently. "You're going to stay with a kind family tonight, a foster family. They're really nice people and they're excited to meet you." Ethan frowned, clearly unsure about this new arrangement. "What if they don't like me?" he asked quietly. "They'll love you," Joe interjected firmly. "And you know what? You can come visit me anytime. We'll hang out, maybe grab some ice cream, or go to the park. How does that sound?" Ethan's face brightened at the idea and he nodded eagerly. "Okay," he said, But promise you won't forget about me? I promise, Joe said, placing a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. You're stuck with me now, buddy. With that reassurance, Ethan seemed to relax a bit. Soon after the foster parents arrived, a warm couple named Mark and Rachel Anderson. They introduced themselves with big smiles, kneeling down to Ethan's level to make eye contact. Hi, Ethan, Rachel said softly. We've heard so much about you. Are you ready to come home with us for a little while? Though hesitant at first, Ethan eventually agreed, clutching his blanket tightly as he followed them out to their car. Before leaving, he turned back to wave goodbye to Joe, his expression a mix of sadness and gratitude. Joe waved back, watching, until the car disappeared around the corner. As night fell, the neighborhood began to settle into an uneasy quiet. Yellow tape still marked the perimeter of Ethan's house, a stark reminder of the day's events. Some residents ventured outside, lighting candles and placing flowers near the driveway as a gesture of solidarity and hope. Others gathered in, small groups discussing how the community could better support families facing similar struggles. One neighbor, Mrs. Patel, approached Joe as he prepared to leave the scene. You know, she said thoughtfully, this whole thing has made me realize something. We live so close to each other, yet we don't always know what's happening behind closed doors. Maybe it's time we start looking out for one another. More. Joe nodded in agreement. You're right, he said. Sometimes people are dealing with things we can't see. If we pay attention and offer help when it's needed, we might be able to prevent situations like this from happening. Again, inspired by these words, several neighbors decided to take action. Over the next few days, they organized meetings to discuss ways to strengthen the community's support network. Ideas ranged from creating a neighborhood watch program to hosting regular potluck dinners where residents could connect and check in on each other. Local leaders also announced plans to host workshops on recognizing the signs of domestic violence and mental health struggles, ensuring that everyone knew where to turn for help. For Joe, the experience left a lasting impression. Though he returned to his usual garbage route the following week, he couldn't shake the memory of Ethan's frightened face or the trust the boy had placed in him. It reminded him of the power of human connection. The simple act of showing up, listening, and caring could change someone's life forever. And as for Ethan, though his journey was far from over, he carried with him the knowledge that he wasn't alone. Somewhere out there, a kind-hearted garbage man named Joe was rooting for him, ready to step in whenever he was needed. In the midst of tragedy, a bond had formed, one that promised to endure long after the headlines faded and the world moved on.